Conveyancing solicitors. Can't work with them? Well, actually, it turns out you can't work without them. You actually need them. So in this episode, because solicitors are so important to the success of your property investment journey, we thought we'd better get one on the show and understand what makes a great solicitor and how you can make your investment journey a lot easier.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come to be informed and inspired. You are going to want to listen closely to this week's show because we're talking to a solicitor who's going to give you so much more insight into the conveyancing process and teach you what you can do to make the process go smoother as well. And make sure you stick around to the end for Hub Extra, where we're going to save you a little bit of time every time you touch your phone.
So let's kick off with our news story, and this week we've got some lovely data to work with. We've got the latest information from HomeTrack. This is their report for August 2020, and the HomeTrack Index gives us a breakdown of all the major cities in the UK and how they're performing, or at least their property prices are performing. And over the last 12 months, we're not surprised by who's at the top, but maybe surprised by how well the cities at the top are actually doing.
Yeah, there are one or two big things that we didn't predict would happen this year, but one thing we did predict was that Nottingham and Manchester would do really well in terms of price growth, and some other cities that are up there as well. But those are the top two, both of them growing at more than 4% year on year. 4.2% for Manchester, 4.7% for Nottingham, which is really quite astonishing. Both of them way outperforming the UK average, which is 2.6%. But Robert, even the 2.6% average is so much better than we thought that it would be at the start of the year, let alone what people thought it would be in March.
Yeah, the numbers are really strong, and there's a bit of the year left to go. But where we stand, if it finished right now, I think everyone would be very happy with the results. Even London has seen 2.1% growth over the last 12 months. So below average, but still, that's good for London compared to how it has performed over the last few years. In fact, the only city in negative territory is Aberdeen. I can't remember what fool said there might be one to watch this year. I don't know. We'll have to check the predictions episode to see who said that. But overall, very encouraging results from what seems to be not a very encouraging year. But actually, the data is telling us, actually, everyone, this ain't too bad. So a few months left of the year to go, but so far, so good.
Now, something was announced last week by Amazon. They're expanding their Amazon Music service into podcasts. And this doesn't sound too exciting. All the big tech companies are doing music offerings. You've got YouTube Music, Spotify getting into podcasts. These things getting announced all the time. But it turns out, Rob, that what Amazon has done is actually made your year. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say. And might turn out to be useful for one or two other people as well.
Yeah, if you've got a device with this name open, I'm very sorry if it triggers it off. But yes, Alexa now, if you ask to play the Property Podcast, Alexa will gladly oblige, which has probably made my year. I don't need to do anything else right now. I think it's superseded all my goals. Now my Alexa device can play the podcast at much annoyance to my entire family, but to my personal joy. So if you want to listen through any of your smart home devices, they all should now play the podcast at request. I mean, what more do you want? I think that's peak tech, really. You play the podcast through your smart device. I don't know where else we can go.
There are many wonderful things about investing in property, but the actual process of making a property purchase is not one of them. The conveyancing process is long, it can be frustrating, it's confusing, and in some cases it could even feel like you might end up losing a great deal just because the legals are turning out to be such heavy going. We've said some fairly uncomplimentary things about solicitors on the podcast over the years, which now is a bit awkward because we've got a solicitor on the show. Rather than just complaining about it, we want to find out why the legal process can take so long and what we can do as investors to help it go more smoothly. So to help us do that, today we're talking to Afshin, who is a partner at Ronald Fletcher Baker in their Manchester office. She manages a large team that specialises in property, and she's a recommended lawyer on the Legal 500 who's experienced in acting for first-time buyers and investors, so the perfect person to have this conversation with. So Afshin, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. To get us started, can you just give us a rundown of how the conveyancing process actually works?
So the conveyancing process it's actually a very structured process, and it's one where you can be quite organised. So it's great to be a conveyancing lawyer when you're an organised person because you have stages and it rarely varies, certainly when you're dealing with a purchase. So from instruction of a new matter from a client, you will receive contract papers from a seller's solicitors. You'll carry out your legal due diligence, which will include checking the title of the document, checking searches, anything related to the property, such as planning permission, any kind of legal requirement. So we'll do our due diligence of the entire process. Once we're satisfied with everything, after we've raised inquiries and received satisfactory responses, we'll report to clients. Clients, if they're then happy, they will confirm that to us and we'll proceed to an exchange of contract. The exchange of contract process is essentially the part that becomes legally binding on all parties. Once you've signed the contract, dated it, timed it, then there's no going back from that point. Often people will exchange and complete on the same day. Completion is the date that you will pick up the keys for the property, and that's your legal completion date, that you become the legal owner of the property. Often people will do the exchange and completion process on the same day. Others will want a gap, so they'll want to exchange so that they have the certainty of knowing that they will definitely get the property and then get everything organized, such as removals, mortgage funds, that kind of thing. So sometimes they will want a gap of 1 or 2 weeks and then we'll complete. But the end stage is the exchange and the completion, which is the exciting bit, because that's the bit when the property is exactly what you want it to be and you definitely want to proceed.
Okay, there's clearly a lot involved there. For those of us who might not be 100% clear, can you quickly tell us the main differences between the exchange date and the completion date?
So an exchange of contract it's literally an exchange between a seller's solicitor and a purchaser's solicitors. And that exchange involves confirmation between both parties that they're happy with the contract terms. And the terms essentially are the details of the property, the title of the property, the purchase price, any other special conditions that may be agreed. But usually we would stick to standard conditions. So the exchange is actually probably more important than the completion date. I know everyone gets excited about the completion date because that's the date that you will get the keys. But the exchange date is the time when you are confirming that you definitely want to buy this property. So you have to go through the exchange process, and it is a process between solicitors where we will run through the contract. So we will get the contract pre-signed by our respective clients, and then we will run through it, date it, time it, and enter the completion date, enter deposit details. So that is really, it's essentially the contract. It's firming up the contract. And once everybody's in a legally binding contract, then we will go on to the completion date, which is really more just a formality, just to get the funds in order. So the completion date is more focused on the money side of it. Exchange is the contract side of it. Completion is more on the money side of it. You make sure that you've got your mortgage funds in, you've got the balance in from purchasers. You will do the telegraphic transactions, sending the funds across to sellers' solicitors. And once that's done, you can authorize key release.
Great. That should definitely make things clearer for everyone listening. Now, we've complained on the podcast many times about the length of time that it takes to get through the conveyancing process. And it's not just us, it's something lots of investors complain about. So enlighten us, why does it take so long?
On average, we say a conveyancing process takes between 6 to 8 weeks. And there's actually quite a lot that conveyancers certainly have to cram into those 6 to 8 weeks to get done. And I think a lot of clients and other external agencies may not realize how much has to be done in the background. And I suppose clients will often feel that the process is taking so long because they may not be kept updated throughout. So I think it feels longer when you're just not kept in the loop as to what's going on. But there really is a lot going on in the background. You'll have multiple parties involved. So the solicitors will be checking all the legal work, legal title, raising inquiries, carrying out the searches, preparing a report. In the meantime, we're waiting for mortgage offers, and often that's relying on brokers to get that. And we all know that with a mortgage offer, there's a whole set of other things that a buyer will have to do. So often we're waiting for that as well. And then it's a case of when you get the mortgage offer, many will have conditions in the offer. So lenders will want to make sure that you've dealt with their requirements as well as the requirements of the buyer. For example, if it's been extended, you've got to make sure the planning is in place. It's a leasehold property. And so we've got to not only satisfy the buyer, but also the lender. And I think a lot of buyers may not realize that the lender is a client in itself as well, and you have to protect their interest. So there is a lot going on. And the process that I explained a couple of minutes ago, there's quite a lot involved in that. And because there are so many parties, sometimes it is a waiting game. So as a buyer solicitor, you'll raise inquiries, and then that seller solicitor will have to speak to the seller, get replies in. The seller will often have to go back and find paperwork. So there is often, I call it a delay of a few weeks, but it's not really a delay. It's just part of the process. You've got to kind of allow time for things to happen.
There's clearly so much that has to be done to acquire such a large asset, and there's obviously a lot of people involved. Do you feel the same frustrations that clients get when dealing with the other party solicitor?
It is frustrating, and I really try to avoid the blame game, because we always know that often when there are solicitors acting on the other side, that they are, they've received inquiries, we're hoping that they are looking into it. I mean, don't get me wrong, you will get some solicitors who will sit on things for weeks on end and you won't really know what's going on unless you keep chasing them, and that is frustrating. And certainly clients become frustrated at that as well. And it does become a bit of a blame game, unfortunately, but there's a lot of chasing in the conveyancing process now, where as soon as something lands on your desk, then you've got to deal with it straight away. And you will often get solicitors who won't deal with things straight away. And that's where the frustration is created, because you can't force another solicitor's hand. You can't force them to work on something quickly. So I suppose that's where agents come in, and agents will be really good at it. And they will often, they don't mind picking up the phone and constantly chasing and asking what's going on. So that definitely helps speed things up, I think.
So being able to complete on a purchase in a really fast time can be such a huge bargaining chip when you're negotiating on a deal. After hearing everything you need to go through, is rapid conveyancing even possible? Can people do this?
Potentially, yes. So I think the quickest completion I've had from the moment I've received an instruction to completion, I think, has been 3 days, which may well be a record, but there are ways to do it. And that will really depend on a buyer's personal circumstances. So if you're a cash buyer, absolutely, that strengthens your position straight away. If you've got the funds readily available that can be transferred to a solicitor's account within a day, then absolutely, your case could potentially be expedited. The second thing is the title. So if we're dealing with a straightforward freehold title with no issues on the title whatsoever, no restrictions, no covenants, then that will definitely strengthen your position. If it's a vacant property, it's ready to go, then again, that will strengthen your position in terms of getting things done quickly. As a cash buyer as well, you also have the discretion of whether or not you want to purchase searches. So all lenders have a requirement that you must get searches, and the searches will include a local search, an environmental, water and drainage search, and we often get a chancel search as well. If you're a cash buyer, you can decide whether or not you want the searches. We would always obviously advise against it, but you will often get, so for example, if somebody's buying a property from a family member, or if the property is known to them, or they've bought one next door, they have full knowledge of it, then a lot of the times they will make the call not to get searches. And if you have a vendor who wants to move as quickly as you, then yeah, it can be done within a couple of days if need be. You just have to make sure that everybody is ready to go. You're ready to sign documents the day you instruct me. You've got your funds ready, and we can get it done.
3-day conveyancing. That's very impressive. There'll definitely be people listening to this who want to speed up their next purchase. Even if it's not a super speedy 3-day conveyancing process, is there anything buyers can do to help move the process along?
With what a buyer can do to assist is really to make sure they have all their documentation ready and in place. So from the outset, we as solicitors have to make sure that we've carried out our email checks and done our KYC properly. So if a client can make sure that they have their certified passport, proof of address ready, we would need certification dated within about 6 months. If they can get all of their AML information ready, so bank statements, details of where the funds have come from, and that kind of thing, if that's all ready, and also the mortgage offer. So we find often it's the mortgage offer. Certainly in recent times with the pandemic, it's definitely created a delay in getting mortgage offers we've seen. So the conveyancing and the interest in buying and selling properties hasn't really lessened, but certainly with lenders and getting mortgage offers, that there seems to be an impact there. So if clients can really stay on top of their mortgage application and making sure that their broker is submitting applications on time and making sure that their documents are in hand for their brokers to submit, then I think that will certainly save probably at least a week or two, because we find that takes a lot of time. Getting signed client care letters back as well can cause a delay of about a week. Also, I think a buyer can speak to the vendor or the agent at the outset and ask them to make sure that the seller solicitor has the contract pack ready to go. So when we receive instructions, and we'll confirm instructions with the seller solicitor, often you're waiting a week, 2 weeks just to get the initial contract papers in. And again, that's a delay. And then obviously we've got to review the pack, which could take a few days, raise inquiries. A lot of the back and forth, potentially that time could be cut if everybody kind of had everything ready from the very outset.
Now, getting searches seems like a big part of the process, and they can slow the transaction down. So just how important are they? Can they end up saving investors a lot of money and pain?
So the searches we get now are great. They're very self-explanatory, and they will highlight anything in really scary, bold red writing to say potential risk here. Fortunately, we don't see that very often, but the times that we do, it's vital to this property. And we've had many transactions that haven't proceeded because of what searches have highlighted. So the environmental search is a very important search. It will highlight first and foremost any potential contaminated land issue. The searches are good in that not only do they highlight potential risks, they also give you information on how to get to the bottom of it. It will give you recommendations and refer you to external sources so that you can investigate and satisfy yourself that there aren't any environmental factors that you need to be really concerned with. So when we see a potential alert, we will get all the documentation, usually from the seller solicitor. We would expect them to go to a local authority to contact the environmental agency to give us that reassurance, really. And then we would get that package and send it off to our search provider and ask them to revise it to a pass. Similar to coal mining searches, if we find out that there's some kind of mining shaft within the vicinity of the property, we'd have to report that to lenders as well. Flood risk as well. If it does highlight potential flood risks, we often refer clients to building insurance providers to make sure that they wouldn't have any issues with insuring the property, which is the main thing. And often these searches, they won't highlight these concerns, which is good. I think unless told otherwise, assume everything's okay, which we do see more often than not. But it's really when it comes back as a risk that you really need to think carefully about whether you want to take it on, and potential issues with mortgageability. Similar to that, we have the local search. So that will highlight any works that have been done to the property. And if you're buying a property which has had a lot of work done, for example, extensions, loft conversions, basement conversions, then the search will highlight that. And it will also highlight whether or not the work's been signed off, which again is really important because you want to make sure that you have all your local authority consents. So it's definitely something that we would advise always, whether you're a cash buyer or whether there's a mortgage. We certainly see the benefits of searches, but the downside with searches is they can take a lot of time. Sometimes you're waiting up to a month to get a search in. And when you want to move quickly, it's not always ideal to have to wait for that eventually.
Afshin, thank you so much for your time today. Again, we really appreciate you giving us your time and pulling back the curtain so people have a better understanding of what conveyancing's all about, especially from a highly experienced solicitor as yourself. Before you go, if someone's having issues with their purchase or sale, is there anything they can do to get it back on track?
So I think the best thing to do, first and foremost, is to really have that conversation with your solicitor. The reason things probably aren't going as well as you would like it to is probably because the solicitor probably has too much on their plate. So if you have that conversation and literally just put all your cards on the table and explain to your solicitor why things are so important and why you need things to be done within a certain time frame, then that will definitely help. And it's really important, open communication between all parties. And if that doesn't work, then every solicitor works within a team, and there will always be somebody hired. There'll always be some kind of supervisor who you can approach. And, rather than it being an antagonistic thing, there's no harm in contacting that person's supervisor and just say, look, I'm a bit concerned that this solicitor just isn't providing the service that I need or just isn't meeting the timescales that I'm working on. Could you either speak to that solicitor to get them to move along, or often there'll be many people in the team who may have the capacity to deal with cases, and there'd be no harm in swapping it with another person in the team, I suppose. So I think the key is communication, is to just try and speak to the person who's dealing with your case. And if it still isn't working, try and go higher up to see if they can help deal with it. And then I think worst case scenario, you would just have to move your file to a different firm that had the time and the resources to give you what you needed.
Or just jump on the phone and give Afshin a call, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When it comes to my team, absolutely. I'll make sure and I'll get it completed for you in a week. You don't need to worry.
Wow. Well, thank you so much to Afshin for sharing her knowledge with us on the show. You know, Afshin is clearly a brilliant solicitor. And I think the thing for me, Rob, that makes her a brilliant solicitor are many things, but two things in particular stand out. The fact that she's proactive and tries to get ahead of the game and anticipate things coming down the line rather than just letting things happen and then trying to solve them. And also pragmatic. And being pragmatic is really important as a solicitor as well. Now, when you are looking for your own solicitor, these are the type of things that you should be looking out for. You don't want a passive solicitor who just sits on paperwork and then gets to it when you call them up. You really want a solicitor that's driving things forward. And of course, you can try asking them questions before you work with them to get a sense of how they work. But ultimately, you're only going to find out once you work with them. But if they're not this way inclined, then review the solicitor you're working with. You don't have to stick with them for the rest of your lives. You know, work with them on one transaction. If they don't operate that way, then look around again, because you don't have to accept that as the norm.
Definitely. I said it back at the start, and that we moan about solicitors a lot, but they can add so much value because they can do something we can't do. They can actually read through all these documents and make sense of them. It's like they can speak another language and they can identify problems in there that you would have no idea about. So there's a potential that a good solicitor can save you from a whole world of pain. But the key word that you said there, Rob, I think is pragmatic. There are solicitors out there who will just give you a gigantic list of everything that could possibly ever be a problem in any kind of bizarre scenario you could mention. And you're just looking at this and going, well, I don't know, should I be worried about this or not? I have no idea. A pragmatic solicitor will say, look, there are all these things, but here's the one or two things that you really need to be thinking about, and you need to weigh up these risks. And you need to weigh up these risks and how concerned you are about them, or maybe you want to insure against that. If you can find a solicitor who does that for you, then stick with them. The other thing that really stood out to me is that because of the nature of the conveyancing process, there are so many opportunities for things to grind to a halt and for the solicitor to blame someone else. There's always the other side. There's always the searches. There are loads of easy outs for them to drop the ball and make out that it's someone else's fault. So you do need to have a lot of faith in the solicitor that they're using. And again, like you said, Rob, they should be anticipating some of the things that might happen in the future so they can get ahead of those rather than reacting to them. But also, there are so many places in the process where we can slow things down. As a client, you need to be responsive. And we heard how you can easily lose a couple of weeks at the start of the process just by not getting documents returned. So yes, you need to find a good solicitor, but you also need to treat them well, and you need to do your bit as well. Getting a transaction over the line isn't easy, so it does have to be a team effort.
Okay, it's now time for a success story. What have you got for us this week, Rob?
This week I've got one from Stuart in the form of a podcast review, who says, firstly, I've never bothered to leave a review for anything on iTunes before, but this podcast deserves it. After listening to the podcast for the past number of years, I've now finally purchased my first buy-to-let, done a bit of work to it and got it rented out. I don't think I would have done it without all the quality knowledge and the nudges to take action from the Robs. Well, that is awesome. The first one is always the hardest. I'm sure that'll be the first of many. And we love hearing your success stories. So whether you just secured your first or done a deal that you're particularly proud of or whatever else you've achieved, let us know. You can leave us a podcast review or you can find us on the socials at Property Hub UK.
It's the part of the show where we like to give you a little bit extra. It could be a book, a quote, or a tool. Something to help enrich your life. This week's Hub Extra is a hack I've recently discovered on my iPhone. It's absolutely brilliant. It's called Shortcuts. So Shortcuts have been on iOS, iPhone for a long time now, but it's only something I've recently been using, and I don't think many other people use as well. That's why I want to bring it to your attention. But essentially, it does what it sounds like. It shortcuts to stuff that you use all the time. If there are documents that you refer to a lot, you can, instead of going into the app and finding that document, you can use a shortcut to just click and be straight there. Something else I'll do is use Trello, and there are certain boards I use more frequently on Trello, so I have shortcuts on my home screen to that. And you can do loads of super cool things around home automation as well. So it's an absolutely brilliant tool. You should absolutely check it out. It's quite a hack. You'll be surprised about the amount of things you can do and the efficiencies you can bring to your life by using it. Now, unfortunately, I don't think it's on Android. but iOS users take advantage of it. And I recommend you go and watch a few YouTube videos on shortcuts for iOS to get some ideas. That's what I did, and I found it super useful.
You know what, Rob? We don't have to leave Android users hanging, because while you were doing that, I've just been having a bit of a play around with my phone and discovered you can actually do the same thing on Android. I had no idea that feature was there. That's actually really, really useful. So if you are an Android user, you can still go out and check out the resources that Rob was talking about to get those ideas, and you can implement them as well. So that's us done for this week. Thank you so much to Afshin for joining us and shedding some light on what is a mysterious process for most of us. Let us know what you think about what we've covered in this episode. We love to hear from you. We're on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Property Hub UK. And of course, there's a Property Hub forum at propertyhub.net/forum. We'll see you again on Tuesday for Ask Rob and Rob. And then, of course, the Property Podcast again next Thursday morning. Until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.